all of a sudden, a man entered the lunchroom. He charged back into the kitchen area, and all of a sudden you just hear this huge commotion and this woman screaming, and you could just hear him, all these things banging around and him hitting her. And we went back to peek through where you could look, and you could just see this man assaulting this poor woman who had been working there at the cafeteria. It was horrible. The whole area cleared out. People started screaming. Nobody knew what was going to happen next. I ran and called the police and told the security that this poor woman was just being clobbered by this guy in back. Anyway, within a few minutes, the police showed up and apprehended this guy. And, you know, I was with one of my friends and I just kept saying, I'm going to stick around because I want to make sure to tell the police that I'll come to court and testify for this woman. I saw this guy beating her up. And you could just see her as they were standing there with this guy in cuffs, that she was shaking. She was terrified. And, you know, I went up to her and I said, look, you know, I saw what happened. You don't have to worry. I'm going to come testify for you. And she wanted nothing to do with it. She just looked at me and said, you don't know how much all of this makes my problem worse. And I just remember thinking at that time, if you could do something for that person, then you've really done something. In law school, I started out working with the family violence clinic with my professor, Mary Beck there. She was wonderful. So she invited me to be a part of the Missouri Battered Women's Clemency Coalition, which at the time was a group of all of the law schools in Missouri who had gotten their clinics together to help a group of battered women who were imprisoned at a time that battered spouse syndrome wasn't a defense. And so evidence of abuse wasn't admitted at trials in the state of Missouri. And as a result, this whole group of women were serving these incredibly long prison sentences when nobody had ever heard their side of the story about what happened and their circumstances. Both Vicky and Carlene had been convicted of murdering their abusers at about the same time period. By the time they were released, they had each served about 32 years each in prison for killing their abusers, even though evidence of the abuse was never admitted at either of their trials. Carlene and Vicky both had been considered for clemency. That had been rejected by the governor, which clemency is a very political process. You don't expect everybody who applies for it to get it. As a result, there was a group that kind of came together around the women remaining in the project to get legislation passed that would take these harsh sentences they had. Both Carlene and Vicky were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for 50 years. The legislation was passed to make them and two other women eligible for parole even though they hadn't received a clemency. It was a terrific day and very exciting, and Carlene and Vicky immediately petitioned for parole. Unfortunately, the parole board sat on their petitions for almost a year without ruling on them. The parole board was taking into consideration a lot of other, primarily political factors in denying their parole, and we felt that that just wasn't warranted. So we filed a writ. Once it became a question of whether these women were a danger, whether they would violate the law upon release, there's no question. And all three of them, including Carlene and Vicky, were given parole dates. And fortunately, after 32 years each, they walked out of prison last October, and it was wonderful.